After fighting tyranny abroad in the Second World War, Canadians take on challenges at home. Across the country, passionate changemakers disrupt the status quo and demand justice to further define Canada. We are explorers, risk-takers, and dreamers, fighting the odds in a land of extremes. Across a vast continent, we build a nation. Truly strong and free. Before 1949, Newfoundland and Labrador is not a part of Canada. For over 300 years, it has been either a British possession or a self-ruling dominion. After World War II, Britain offers Newfoundland the chance to decide its future. September 11, 1946. Delegates to the Newfoundland National Convention debate the options to be put to a referendum. Continued British rule or full independence. Businessman Peter Cashin favors independence.
The future of Newfoundland as a country is in our hands. Join me in voting for responsible government.
The Responsible Government movement was a movement led by Cashin and people largely in St. John's who thought that they had the capacity to run an independent nation.
But now, former farmer and radio host Joey Smallwood proposes a third option. Join Canada.
Mr. Speaker, we are not a nation, we're a municipality.
We'll talk about a risk taker and talk about a gambler. When he first championed the cause, it seemed patently absurd. I mean, it was a long shot.
He was the little fellow from Gambo, that's what he called himself, and the merchant class in St. John's was totally against him.
And we're living in an era when small countries have less chance than ever to survive.
Judas! Smallwood is a traitor to Newfoundland!
But Smallwood knows the standard of living is much higher in Canada.
Joey Smallwood came to believe that Canada was the right choice because it would bring to Newfoundlanders, especially to the poorer people in the outports, social benefits that they didn't have.
Most of the island's outports have one main industry, fishing. But you can't fish in these waters all year round.
To keep your family fed and clothed in the winter when you couldn't fish, the merchant would advance you a certain amount. And then in the summer, you would work and you would pay that off. And then you never had any money in your pocket.
What Joey promised Newfoundlanders was a richer life. They were going to have the money that came from Canada's new social welfare system, family allowances, old age pensions.
October 28, 1946. Smallwood introduces a motion to include joining Canada as a choice in the upcoming referendum.
All against?
He's overruled. Smallwood knows he won't succeed with politicians, so he goes right to the people to argue his case.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
He had experience as a radio host, and he used this situation as a way of promoting Confederation.
29 delegates from the National Convention, or should I say 29 dictators, have decided that you should not be able to vote for the Canadian option. Now I ask you, is this a democracy?
Smallwood also appeals directly to Ottawa. And it, too, wants the option of joining Canada added to the referendum ballot. Canada shares Smallwood's vision to make the Rock its most eastern province. But Smallwood still has to convince Newfoundlanders. Cashin has enlisted some local newspapers to sell independence. So Smallwood starts his own.
Did you know that the richest country in the world for her population is Canada.
Smallwood claims independence will only benefit wealthy Newfoundlanders and leave the working class behind.
Smallwood, he was a promoter. He'd been a promoter all his life. He had a passionate love of Newfoundland that translated into an enthusiasm for union with Canada.
May 31st, 1948, Smallwood gives a speech in St. John's. It's the stronghold of the independence movement, where emotions against joining Canada run high.
St. John's was the hotbed of the main area of resistance to Confederation. Many people fight and die for independence, regardless of the problems that they're facing socially and economically.
It's enemy territory, but Smallwood takes the risk.
No more speeches. We're sick of you Confederates. Go! Hey, you lousy! Get out of here, you son of a...
Smallwood faces violence throughout the campaign. But he won't give up.
He couldn't rest because he was just consumed with the idea that he couldn't lose and that Canada had to win.
Smallwood can't win the fight to join Canada without the voters in the outport communities. He travels by car and seaplane, promising social benefits if they join Canada.
Our people are on the march in the tens of thousands.
People in the outports, which had always had a very iffy relationship with St. John's, which is where the government was, where the power was, where the money was, wanted a relationship with someone else that maybe they could have a better relationship with.
The people, not thrones and crowns and merchants, but men.
July 22nd, 1948, Voting Day.
Don't look very good, boys.
It's 1:10 in the morning. All districts in the region surrounding St. John's have voted for independence and against joining Canada. Smallwood is losing. It's almost dawn when the last votes come in from the outports, where he campaigned so hard. Joey Smallwood has done it. Confederation only wins 52% of the vote. It's controversial, but it's enough to bring Newfoundland into Canada.
Joey would always say he had dragged us kicking and screaming out of the 19th and into the 20th century. We had come out of a feudal kind of system and into a more modern world where there was hope. So people were looking for hope, and that's what he gave them.
Changemaker Joey Smallwood is elected to be Newfoundland's first premier, a position he'll hold for nearly 23 years. During this time, the Trans-Canada Highway and advances in medical care and education come to Newfoundland and Labrador. Across the Gulf of St. Lawrence in Nova Scotia, there's a different kind of status quo being challenged. In the 1940s, Halifax is booming. It also has the largest black population per capita of any Canadian city. There are many entrepreneurs.
Well, I can't put you in at 4.
1946, Viola Desmond runs a beauty salon.
Do you just want to put that on the shelf there?
She was a business owner. She was very well respected. She was, she was a powerhouse within her own community.
Style, relaxer, and comb. That will be $2, please.
But it hasn't been easy for her to get here. At this time, beauty schools in Halifax don't accept black students. So Desmond went to Montreal and Atlantic City to learn her craft.
Limitations on the black population would have been where you could work, where you could go to school. Black people would have a general sense of where they might not be welcomed.
As Viola Desmond heads off on a business trip, She's about to transform not only her life, but the lives of countless Canadians when she confronts racism head on. November 8, 1946, traveling on business, Viola Desmond makes an unplanned stop because of car trouble in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia.
One for downstairs, please.
She takes in a movie at the Roseland Theatre. Though she asks for a main floor ticket, the cashier gives her one for the balcony.
Enjoy your movie. Thank you.
Because here, only whites sit on the main floor. And black people must go upstairs. Viola Desmond doesn't know this unspoken racist rule. Because where she lives in Halifax, theaters are mixed.
That's an upstairs ticket. Oh, I'm sorry. There must have been a mistake. I'd like to exchange this for a ticket on the main floor, please.
I'm sorry.
Why?
I'm not permitted to sell downstairs tickets to you people.
The unspoken rule has been spoken.
She must have been so fed up, so sick of these laws or these rules, some of them clear, some of them hidden, that just tells you you're just not one of us. You're just not good enough. And we're going to show you that in everything we do. And I think all those things go through your head, but you also think, I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore.
She's pursued her dreams. She knows where she feels in her mind she deserves to be. So at some point deep within her, she knew there was a change happening, and she was a part of that change.
But those who enforce the status quo have not changed.
Ma'am, you can't sit here. We've got a seat for you up in the balcony.
I'm fine right here, thank you.
She's saying, no, my space is on the main floor, just like you, which is a very, very powerful idea.
You need to move.
No.
Viola Desmond is arrested, and she's thrown in jail that night.
And they charge her for tax evasion because there was a 1 cent difference for the price of the ticket for the downstairs, the main area in the theater, and the upstairs in the balcony.
The judge finds her guilty of defrauding the government of 1 cent, giving her a $26 fine. She pays and is now a convicted criminal.
I mean, you could literally fall apart, or you could be strong and you can sort of somehow combat it.
Viola Desmond discovers she has support.
Tell me what happened, Viola. All the details.
5 years earlier, journalist Carrie Best was thrown out of the same movie theater and also arrested.
And after I purchased my ticket, I walked into the theater and was immediately chased down by an usher who told me that I had the wrong ticket.
She has founded the first newspaper, owned and written by Black Nova Scotians, The Clarion.
Well, Viola, it's your decision.
I'm going to fight this.
Okay, let's get to work.
Carrie Best puts Viola Desmond's story on the front pages of The Clarion.
Imagine yourself as a Black Nova Scotian. You know, you have your dignity being denied on a daily basis. in small ways. And then you hear about this woman who said no more and stood up. And then the next thing you know, you see her face on the cover of the newspaper, what that must do to the spirit.
Desmond's lawyer appeals to Nova Scotia Supreme Court and loses on a technicality for not filing the appeal within 10 days. But word of her courage spreads.
Her action got the country and the province of Nova Scotia to look at the laws and force them to change the laws.
In the 1950s, the government of Nova Scotia begins to enact laws that prohibit the segregation that got Viola Desmond arrested.
On behalf of the province of Nova Scotia, I am sorry.
In 2010, the Nova Scotia government issues Viola Desmond a pardon and an apology. They are posthumous. She died in 1965.
She proves that the smallest things that you do may become history. The resilience that you have inside you to pursue your goals, to stand up for what you believe in itself is history.
As a Black Canadian woman featured on a banknote, Viola Desmond continues to make history.
Viola Desmond.
Her younger sister, Wanda Robson, is there for the official announcement. Canadians will be able to see the face of this champion of justice every day. In the mid-20th century, Canadians continue to challenge the status quo. But we have failed to confront one of our darkest chapters: the residential school system. For over a century, in partnership with the Catholic, Anglican, United, and Presbyterian churches, the Government of Canada has taken Indigenous children from their homes and ordered them to live in residential schools, where their language and culture are violently suppressed. Over the years, more than 150,000 Indigenous children will be forced to live in 130 schools.
Residential schools were designed to kill the Indian and the child. Canadians forcibly directed the cultural change of Indigenous children.
If you look at oppression everywhere around the world, the first thing the oppressor does is it takes over the education of the children of the people they want to oppress.
Separated from their families, the children are vulnerable.
Awful things that happened to them in that place. The physical abuse and the sexual abuse that occurred at the residential schools, that was part of daily life.
And the brainwashing that they were taught, that they were less than as a people, that they were not, that they were dirty, that their language meant nothing, their culture was bad. My father and my mother went. My dad was there a long time, and he was beaten, abused, raped.
1970, Blue Quills Indian Residential School in St. Paul, Alberta. Like many before him, Andy Redcrow is a victim of abuse. An earlier beating has left him deaf in one ear.
Redcrow!
Andy's father, Stanley Redcrow, is one of few Cree people who work at the school. Having suffered abuse when he was sent here, Redcrow knows the worst of it happens at night. So he's moved close to the school and takes his kids home every evening. But he has no power to stop what happens during the day.
For so long, the government had such total control. You had Indian agents who quelled something would happen. You had RCMP all over the place if something happened. So that idea of fear was always there.
Agents from Canada's Department of Indian Affairs make their rounds of the schools to ensure students are in attendance.
What's going on here? It isn't right.
Look, change is coming.
But it won't be the change Red Crow wants. So he will lead his community and demand that change. (1970) Blue Quills Indian Residential School.
What do you mean you're going to shut down the school?
There's nothing to discuss. The decision's already made. It's out of my hands.
Stanley Red Crow hears that the school is to be closed.
Can we just talk about this?
But the government's plan to assimilate these students into public schools is not what Red Crow and other Indigenous parents want.
And there was an understanding that if we were going to move forward as First Nations people in this country, that the very first thing that had to happen was that we needed to start teaching our children our own history.
That will be impossible with the government's wider plan to shut down all residential schools and send all Indigenous students to public schools. Red Crow galvanizes support from other Indigenous parents for the right to teach their own children.
Enough of these families, who were most likely all victims themselves, said enough. This has to end here for our children.
July 12, 1970. Stanley Red Crow leads fellow parents in a sit-in at Blue Quills. They occupy the school, demanding to be given control of the education of their children.
We're not leaving here until we get what we want.
The system which has been used to oppress us, the system which has taken so much away from us, which is the education system, we're taking it back.
They camp outside the school, pledging to stay until the government hears their plea. They start each day with a smudging ceremony.
It cleanses your mind of different thoughts so that you have a focus. It's a calling of the universe together so that everything is a witness to this moment. When you think of no cultural element was ever allowed in a residential school, to have a ceremony going on in a school, that had to be a significant breakthrough. That meant something. That meant voice. That meant power.
The sit-in at Blue Quills continues for 17 days as Red Crow and the other parents negotiate with Ottawa for a meeting with Minister of Indian Affairs, Jean Chrétien. They begin again to teach their young.
I think part of the education, giving people back their language, giving people back their culture, I think that's where the parents were so significant.
Chrétien agrees to the meeting, inviting Stanley Red Crow and the other parents to Ottawa. 3 days of tense negotiations end when Jean Chrétien sends a letter to Stanley Red Crow.
Dear Mr. Red Crow, this is to confirm my discussions with you on July 31st, 1970, at which time I agreed to the transfer of the operation of the residence and the classrooms at Blue Quills School to the Blue Quills Native Education Council.
It had a bigger voice than just the Blue Quills area. Blue Quills was taken over, was a sign that we could determine our own future.
On September 1st, 1970, Stanley Red Crow welcomes the community to the new Blue Quills School.
First time in the history of Canada that an Indian school is opened by the Indian people themselves.
In 1973, Ottawa's Department of Indian Affairs begins to transfer control of all Indigenous education to band councils. It will take decades to close all residential schools, but the attempt to assimilate Indigenous peoples has been disrupted. The long road to healing lies ahead. In 2008, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission begins to collect evidence of extensive abuse at residential schools.
I think we sometimes need to prove as an indigenous community that those dark histories, the demons, if you will, don't own us.
On June 11th, 2008, the Government of Canada apologizes.
Some sought, as was infamously said, to kill the Indian in the child. Today we recognize that this policy of assimilation was wrong, has caused great harm, and has no place in our country.
Blue Quills is now an Indigenous-run university, offering a Bachelor of Arts in Cree.
We don't need a paternalistic society to tell us what's good for us and what we should do for the betterment of our people. We'll decide that.
In the 1950s, another culture is also beginning to decide a new future. In Quebec, the French majority face prejudice. Their resentment over the dominance of the English will erupt in the streets of Montreal. The spark that ignites this rebellion is one of the province's first Francophone superstar athletes, Maurice Rocket Richard. As Canadian as winter, hockey unites Canada like nothing else.
It's a game that everybody played. It was a game in everybody's backyard in all the small towns. There's nothing else that we do that's like that.
In the 1950s, the Montreal Canadiens' Maurice Rocket Richard is the greatest player in the game. He's the first to crack 500 goals.
Rocket Richard was an emblem for Quebec. French-speaking Quebec, the culture, he was our heritage.
He leads his team to a record-setting 8 Stanley Cups.
Loved his people, loved his culture, and loved his team, and loved his sport.
Number 9, Maurice Richard has been ejected from the game.
March 13th, 1955. After being intentionally hit by an opposing player's stick, Rocket Richard escalates the fight and is thrown out of the game. He's received a huge number of ejections and penalties. And some believe it's because of bias against the French.
Francophones were really down under because there was an imbalance in the treatment of the French Canadians and the Anglophones.
The NHL bosses are English. So is the public face of Montreal. Over 80% of Quebecers are Francophone, but most white-collar workers must speak English, leaving Francophones with limited career options.
Part of Rocket's success is that Quebec was in that window of feeling inferior or inadequate. They felt like they were beholden to the English. So that was a ripe time to be in search of a hero.
Having found their hero, Quebecers are shocked when they learn how he'll be penalized for this fight. The decision comes from NHL President Clarence Campbell.
Maurice Richard will be suspended from all games, both league and playoff, for the balance of the current season.
I'd argue that an Anglo, having done the same thing, wouldn't have been penalized the same way.
They picked the ultimate symbol, Rocket Richard. They picked the hero, the people's hero, and they chose to supposedly bully him.
March 17th, Montreal. The first game since Rocket's suspension. He arrives to watch the game. And not far away in the stands is Clarence Campbell, the man who suspended him.
For Clarence Campbell, the president of the National Hockey League, to defiantly sit there at the game, that was just the grain of salt they could not tolerate.
Montreal fans attack the NHL president for what he's done to their hero. A tear gas bomb is thrown.
Rapidly, the atmosphere, became tense, and they had to interrupt, the game because there was a riot.
The Forum is evacuated.
And all of this resentment
in Montreal about the English, who are richer, who have the better jobs, who speak only English, not French. All of this explodes onto St. Catherine Street.
They took that event as an opportunity to scream out loud what they experienced as a frustration.
Desperate to prevent further riots, Montreal city officials implore the rocket to speak to the people. March 18, 1955, the rocket addresses Quebecers in French and then in English.
I want to do what is good for the people of Montreal and my team, so that no further harm is to be done.
Montrealers are glued to their radios.
I will take my punishment.
With one speech,
and come back next year.
He stops the rioting. Over the next decade, Francophone Quebecers assert more influence over business in what will be called the Quiet Revolution.
This willingness, to shake up things in order, to bring change.
In 1967, Quebec invites the world to its biggest party, Expo 67, one of the most successful World's Fairs of the 20th century. In Montreal for Expo, President of France, Charles de Gaulle, utters a phrase that galvanizes Quebec nationalists.
Vive le Québec libre!
It's a startling and shocking moment. If you were even the mildest kind of Quebec nationalist, it must have been absolutely electrifying.
De Gaulle echoes the phrase used by militants calling themselves the Front de Libération du Québec, the FLQ.
The members of the FLQ were young French Canadians dreaming of building a better society, and for them a better society was a society where French Canadians would be independent. Quebec would become an independent country.
Independence from Canada is starting to be debated. But the FLQ don't debate. Throughout the 1960s, they set off over 200 bombs targeting English homes and symbols of English power.
They would issue a statement saying, we are the FLQ. But up until 1970, it was a marginal group.
Different cells within the FLQ work independently of each other. On October 5, 1970, one group escalates their tactics. In Montreal, they arrive at the diplomatic residence of British Trade Commissioner James Cross.
A gift for Mr. Cross?
Please wait.
Tais-toi, tais-toi! Allez, quitte là, quitte là! Quitte-toi là! Allez,
It's a political kidnapping that will make Canadian history. What the FLQ now unleash shocks the country. October 5th, 1970, Montreal. Members of the militant group called the FLQ kidnap British diplomat James Cross. They do it to get their demands heard. It works.
Le FLQ a publié une série de demandes en échange pour la libération de James Cross.
They want the FLQ manifesto to be read on television, freedom for imprisoned FLQ members, money, and asylum in Cuba.
Or else what? Or else you'll be executed in 48 hours.
What the FLQ is trying to do is to stimulate revolutionary enthusiasm by demonstrating that what they had done was possible, was feasible, was important. This was intended to bring larger numbers of Quebecers out onto the streets in their support.
The kidnappers discover that the provincial government has met one of their demands when the manifesto is broadcast. It calls for independence from Canada and French control of Quebec's destiny.
I think very few people agreed with the actions of the FLQ, but when the manifesto was read, those ideas, it was a profound will to be understood and to reflect and give a voice to people who had never had a voice at that point.
On October 10th, the government announces it won't meet the other FLQ demands.
Le FLQ a pris Pierre Laporte, le ministre du Travail du Québec, en otage.
A different cell of the FLQ carries out a second kidnapping. Provincial Cabinet Minister Pierre Laporte.
He was, basically the number 2 in the Liberal government. That was, when the FLQ kidnapped Pierre Laporte, the mood in the province, changed.
Laporte's kidnapping occurs only 5 days after James Cross is abducted. The radical movement is gaining ground. Rallies in support of the FLQ increase in size and passion.
Pour que la libération nationale au Québec.
The Quebec provincial cabinet was terrified, and the government of the city of Montreal was terrified. And Pierre Trudeau is very well aware of this. And in the meantime, the Premier of Quebec comes to him and says, you have to proclaim the War Measures Act. You have to. Legally, Trudeau cannot ignore that.
I am speaking to you at a moment of grave crisis.
On October 16, 1970, 11 days after James Cross is kidnapped, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau invokes the War Measures Act, surprising many, including the kidnappers.
It is an important piece of legislation because basically it gives extra powers to police forces. Among them, the power to arrest individuals without a warrant. And another one is the power to detain someone up to 7 days without, having to bring you before a judge, and then you will know what the charge is.
Civil liberties are suspended. Within 48 hours, 250 people are arrested. There are no more rallies for the FLQ. Within that same 48 hours, Pierre Laporte is murdered. He has been strangled and stuffed in a car trunk.
Those who had some sympathy for the FLQ lost it. It was shocking, it was revolting.
Assassination is not our style, it's not the Canadian way, and all of a sudden, it was happening here in Canada.
Increasingly desperate to locate James Cross, police round up more FLQ supporters.
They arrested about 400, 500 people, and they put them in jail. And many of these people had done nothing. And they were kept in jail for weeks, essentially without charge.
Surveillance and high security finally bear fruit when the police locate James Cross on December 3rd. He has been held captive for 2 months. Police surround the building and cut the power.
Move!
They negotiate till dawn. A swap is arranged, and police convoy them to where it will go down. The site of Expo 67. James Cross will be kept here until his kidnappers land safely in Cuba. The kidnappers get their deal, and no one continues the FLQ style of rebellion in Canada.
the October crisis put an end to the FLQ because of the use of violence in order to promote a political option.
We're not used to have this very polarized situation with extremist views. It left us with a big questioning about how far do we want to go to get to that freedom.
In 1976, the people of Quebec elect René Lévesque as premier, peacefully sweeping the Parti Québécois to power. They pass Bill 101, making French the province's official language at work and in education, transforming the face of Quebec.
And the PQ's victory and the sense of the new identity suddenly that people feel that they have in Quebec has to be somewhere in the middle. It wasn't too quiet, but it wasn't violent.
Across the nation, changemakers have redefined Canada. We have faced our discrimination and begun the long task to right the wrongs of cultural oppression.
Every generation has reinvented this country and pulled everybody along with it. And so this is still a work in progress.
I think most people have a sense of what's right and what's wrong. And I think all it takes is feeling that acutely, feeling that there's something wrong that should be changed and can be changed, and also that there are others who will link arms with you and help make that change.
As more people from around the world choose Canada as their home, we will face new challenges that come with diversity and inclusion as we expand the Canadian experiment into the 21st century.